Hey, Hero, thank you for coming in and sharing your expertise and wisdom with our audience. You have such a marvelous background of accomplishment, of course, in the academic world and in technology, and then also within the IEEE organization. So we'll go through all of that. So again, thank you for coming in and sharing expertise with my audience.
Thank you, Stefan, for having me, and this is truly, great opportunity. So thank you.
So, Hero, you've got such a marvelous background. What were the three inflection points in your life that made you who you are today? And it could have been when you were 3 or 5 years old, inside, outside the family. It could have been something that happened in school. It could have been a challenge that occurred when you were very young. But what were those three defining moments in your life that made this wonderful person you are today and this marvelous career that you have?
Wow, that's such a great question, and I think, well, what point? Okay, maybe well, of course, there are a lot of opportunities. In particular, I have been having a chance to meet with many people, but also meeting with some kind of change in the technology. And so then perhaps I choose meeting with computer programming when I was a kid, and then also I had a chance to meet with community. And then finally, I had a chance to lead some community. So, okay, so firstly, back to the initial one. When I was, I think at that time I was, I think elementary school kid. And then, and my dad bought a personal computer. And then at the beginning, I of course I played some computer game, and but then after that I realized that hey, okay, if I study some computer programming, okay, then I can make my own game, or something, create. So I started to do computer programming, and thanks to my dad, and that it opens the door to the computer and coding, programming, and then now I'm studying, and also doing research and practice, and also reading the community about computing, but also programming, and also software engineering. So that's initial kind of kind of moment. And the second moment could be um, when I was a university student. I had a chance to join a international well, a kind of conference in the area of software engineering, object orientation, programming, coding, and also patterns. So the patterns, and not about pattern recognition, but in the sense of patterns about the practices, and also pattern languages. And when I was a university student, I had a chance to join a international conference about those things: software engineering, patterns, object orientation, and in Japan. So I had a chance to meet with some really kind of guru, like kind of superstar in that area. I still remember, such as, for example, those are still, of course, these are kind of distinguished stars, like Linda Rising, Neil Harrison, but also, yes, James O. Copley, and those are really famous, distinguished stars in the area with object orientation, and also agile software engineering, agile development, and patterns and pattern languages. But they are not like kind of novice people, but they're really really kind of friendly, and even I was really just a normal university student, but but they are really friendly, talking with me. And so I had a really, great chance to, talk many things, with those people and, 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 and think about the future and patterns and software engineering and also object orientation. And so that also opened up the kind of, the future and direction about software engineering patterns and object orientation and Scrum, Agile, and those such thing. And maybe the third one could be then when I started to evolve the body of knowledge about software engineering in IEEE Computer Society. That is called CBOK, Software Engineering Body of Knowledge. It was started around 2021, so almost 5 years ago. Okay, and well, at that time, of course, I was not a president of IEEE Computer Society, or I was not on the board of Computer Society, but I had a chance to lead the evolution of software engineering body of knowledge, and 5 years passed, and I'm still continuing having meeting with all editors of CBOK Guide and what to evolve and how to evolve, and so that a very great opportunity to lead the community, particularly in the area of software engineering, and that opened to the door of having much higher and wider leadership within IEEE and IEEE Computer Society. Okay, so those three perhaps particular kind of key moments for me.
So let's mind your life, and let's say when you were really, really young, uh, uh, you had some exposure to programming and things like that. Did your family guide you in that direction, or it was just a natural curiosity on your part of computers? And
Yeah, I think particularly thanks to my dad, brought me a kind of personal computer to my home, and then then eventually I started to do the computer programming, and so I think that totally made my kind of direction to computers, computer programming, and software.
right, so your dad brought a personal computer at home, and
Yes.
then you started playing with it, and then taught yourself programming and things like this. And so you were always interested in like the technical side when you were very young, the kind of like sciences and math and those areas.
Mm. Uh, yeah, that's a good, interesting question because, yeah, well, one side, yes, I think, but another side, I think, what What? Well, I'm trying to recall what was the actual motivation for doing computer programming. Well, one is of course a kind of technical, kind of curiosity. Okay, because okay, so by using this function or by having access to this memory, okay, so I can do this and that, and so that's a kind of technical curiosity, and so that's why I wanted to study more and learn more about the computers and computer programming and how to make something new, and so that are kind of technical and also but also kind of creativity and some curiosity. But another thing is that I think at that time perhaps um, that brought kind of having some connections more to friends and also some other people. And so perhaps I realized that, okay, so making something interesting could have some much connections to friends, but also some neighbors. And so I think that was also kind of another motivation to study, computers and computer programming, to having more connections and maybe making wider, connection in a network. And indeed, after graduating high school, I joined the not computing department, and at that time, I had a chance to make a very small program, and at that time, internet is it changing everything, right? So I had a chance to make a very small program. It was about kind of searching some documents within the same website, not like Google, like open search engine, but very small, tiny, search program that works just within the same website. Okay, and then I made it open to the community and to the world. And then suddenly, a Japanese publisher called me and, hey, can we use can we include your program in our book? And oh, okay, yeah, please go ahead. And so it was very kind of very unique experience that, oh, hey, my software is going to be used by someone who I didn't totally know, and I didn't meet those users, but oh, that's a very interesting experience, and oh, I can do more. And so I think that's a kind of kind of unique experience, that how making software and computing and programming could connect people, and even someone I don't know. But that's also kind of very kind of motivation.
So you have this interest, in school, you write this program, you get an offer to have this published, and recognition, in essence, that it's something that's of value. And then, you studied engineering, software engineering, computer science in your undergraduate years, master's and PhD. What were the particular areas of focus in your undergrad graduate degrees?
Sure. So when I was an undergraduate, I joined basically a computer science and engineering department. Okay, and then and I particularly well at the I joined a laboratory about software engineering. So it was also a very important moment for me, and because at that time, I was, of course, interested about, how to make software, but I was, interested more about, how to make how to make software. So that is a software engineering. Okay, software engineering is not just making some software, that's it. But software engineering is about how to make good and better, reliable software in efficient way, and so I was really interested about that when I was undergraduate, and so I joined the laboratory of software engineering led by Professor Fukazawa. He also has already retired, but from Waseda University, but still he is leading some. But anyway, so yeah, it was a very unique moment, and yeah. And at that time, I also had a chance to meet with the community of patterns. I think that also changed my life. Okay, so patterns about documenting practices and what are problems, what are solutions, and those patterns are now a kind of basis for many things like agile. And also, so many things. So now I still in the community of patterns, and almost more than 20 years passed, but still I'm in the community of patterns.
I see. So you had this interest in patterns, right?
Yes.
Community of patterns and agile
Right.
and things like this. And
Yeah.
it was an interest in your undergraduate use in software engineering, and then you
Right.
went into your master's and PhD. And so what was your first job after you getting your PhD?
Oh, okay. So my first job was to after getting PhD, I had a chance to join the National Institute of Informatics. That is a kind of national Japanese national kind of laboratory about general informatics, including software engineering, but also computing, AI, of course, and all those things. So I started my professional career as at that time maybe a kind of assistant professor and but at that time, teaching obligation was almost zero. So I had a chance to focus on research, right? And yeah, and I think I was quite lucky to get such job at the national institute, so that I could focus on my research and with as a very talented researchers and so I had always a chance to meet with such, talented professors and researchers and colleagues and discuss about, research, but also some other related areas. And because now everything is somehow, related, right? Such as software engineering, but also AI, computer programming, data science, and also some domain subjects and so on and so on. So I was really lucky to be there.
So you work with this National Institute, and
Yeah,
then continue describing your sort of your career progression and the
right.
exciting work that you worked on.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and particularly at that time, there are many things happening. Patterns, as I said, of course, but also agile was blooming. Okay, and now man, almost agile is a kind of de facto, right? Agile is not just about software development, but also agile management, agile things. Everything is now kind of related to agile. So I was really lucky to witness such a blooming of the concept of it, agile, and also emerge of the agile community. Oh, and also patterns and yeah, software engineering, of course, and yeah. Oh, and then. And also at that time, I started to lead some kind of maybe local communities, okay, like for example, pattern community in Japan, but also some software engineering, some group in Japan, and so I think I had many chances to do so.
So what are your current research interests now?
Oh, wow, it's different. That's of course that's an important question. So. I say AI, of course, and software engineering. Okay. And so one thing is that how AI can empower software engineering. And we see a dramatic change in these years, particularly in these few years. Okay. Um, by having generative AI, large language model, those are changing almost everything in software engineering. Not only about coding, but also design, requirements, testing, and also software development management, and all those things are under kind of change. Okay, so that is one of course important research subject, and I'm having a lot of particularly joint research with industry, and because they are facing such changes. Okay, facing some challenges, but also we are seeing a lot of opportunities by having generative AI for software development. So that's one thing. And another thing is that kind of a different direction from software engineering to AI, because AI is software, right? But right, and but but the problem is that but often AI software is not well designed and well constructed and well maintained from the viewpoint of software engineer. Well, so so I believe that AI needs more software engineering. For example, what is a better design of AI software systems, and also how we can maintain them, and also how we can improve them. And so we are also I'm also working on the such directions, software engineering for AI. How we can do software engineering for AI. So those two, soft AI empowered software engineering and software engineering for AI. Those two are often mutually connected, and so that's the kind of my research, interest.
So you see the explosion of doing software engineering with AI.
Right.
AI also, creating software, and there's something called vibe coding where you could just prompt
Yeah.
and it's gotten better. Which models do you work with? Do you work with like Codex or Cloud, Opus 6, Gemini, you in GitHub, and things like what are the different sort of models you work with and tooling? Do you work with some of the open source things like DeepSeek or Mistral or et cetera?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, my reality is I'm mostly using some uh, very high-end models like GPT, but also Gemini, but also some other, of course, open models, and yeah, but the most important thing is that because our my lab, my research is not just about AI itself, but how we can do software engineering. Okay,
Right.
or how AI can empower software engineering, and also how we can do software engineering for AI. So we are always trying to utilize and compare many different AI models. Okay, such kind of very there's some commercial models, but also open source models, and compare performance, so compares different characteristics of those models, and we often see a very quite unique difference. Okay? Um, yeah,
Which is
quite.
which is your favorite?
Oh, that's interesting question. That well, I think to be honest, it depends on the task. Actually, it depends on task. Okay, so for some coding task, but also in particular some visual language thing, I think Claude model uh, uh, by Anthropic could be quite quite so quite better often. Okay, but at the same time, for some general particular natural language processing task, and also some semantic recognition, and I think we often also adopt GPT, but also Gemini. So it depends on the task. And so once again, I often try to utilize multiple different models, and compare them, and to not stick to just single model, but utilize models as much as possible.
So this is kind of adjacent to what we just talked about. I mean, have you looked at OpenClaw when it came out, and have you actually installed it and tried using it, or your students?
Oh, basically both, but particularly thanks to my students, my lab, I have a lot of great talented students, so they they cannot stop their curiosity. So often they install different AI models, and hey, professor, how about this and that, and oh, okay, interesting. So you go ahead. But meanwhile, for my daily job, I often yeah, it's just a couple of different models, and so yeah.
I see. So your students may have tried OpenClaw, because of Peter Steinberger, released this in November, and it got it in GitHub, and you sort of this vertical adoption rate, and of course in China and everywhere, it's really rapidly being used. Also in the West as well, it's being rapidly used. And then NVIDIA came up with Nemo Claw. So in other words, put some sort of layers on top of it,
Yeah.
right, to make it safer. But is that an area of interest at all to you? This all of this agentic kind of capabilities that are there, and this autonomous agentic kind of capabilities.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Particularly particularly from the viewpoint of software engineering, AI agents, based on those, large language model and also or generative AI models are very, very important for us, and so and notably, each agent could have different unique nature and different characteristics. That is like it could be like how human being human is each individual has a different unique nature, right? So like that I like how each different agent platform could have different unique nature, and so I think that is important, and at the same time, of course, somehow very challenging, but this is very interesting to study more, like study human, like we study AI and also AI agents, and how each different AI agent could have different behavior, different recognition, and yeah. For example, our lab is currently studying how, for example, change requests by coding AI agents could be approved by human. So AI agents,
Right.
can produce a lot of change requests. Okay, like okay, so it's better to change this code, or better to change the document, or better to fix this bug, or something like that. So AI agents can produce a lot of of course change requests. However, the problem is that often human engineers reject. Okay. Yeah, because sometimes often lack of trust. Okay. But also sometimes because of lack of reliability, and also very poor performance of AI agent. So we carefully studied why often such agentic change requests have been rejected by human engineers. And then the major reason was really interesting. And the major reason was not about technical side, technical aspect. Well, actually, we somehow anticipated that. We didn't anticipate that because we at the beginning we believed that okay, maybe because of very poor performance of AI agent. But it looks like that major reason was not about such technical poor performance. But it looks like that AI agents and human need more kind of collaboration. So if there were more human intervention, okay, then such agentic change requests could be approved and accepted by human engineers. So it implies that so more and more collaboration, successful collaboration and communication among AI agents and human engineers are becoming more and more important to have much more successful collaboration. And that is somehow different by each different AI agent and also model platform, such as GPT, Gemini, and the reason look quite different.
That's really, really fascinating. So you have these changes coming from AI agents, change requests, and you find that in some instances there still isn't a high acceptance rate. And it's because there's not enough cooperation between people using these agents, and that's why they're being rejected. And you're saying it's not a technical reason. It's actually a human reason,
Yeah, well,
So,
right, human related risk, right?
yeah,
So yeah, Stefan, so I think that is very interesting, right? But
yeah,
I think that it could be somehow, yeah, I always say that studying AI leads to studying, human, nature, human behavior, right? So, think about uh, so let's think about, okay, so human-based software development, okay? Then how we can trust someone
okay.
and okay, so my colleague, for example, made some, some change requests, and okay, then how we can, accept that and okay, looks like so it should be not just about such, technical thing, but it requires more kind of, collaboration and communication. Okay, so how you made this, and also, but it looks good, but maybe better to, somehow, change here or modify that. And after such, kind of conversational communication, then finally, okay, then finally I can, accept that. So maybe same true for, the collaboration among AI agents and human engineers. So, but this area is rapidly changing. So who knows next year and the next next 3 years or 5 years. But right now, it seems like that.
So when your lab works with OpenAI or works with Anthropic, or you work with Microsoft, or do you work with cloud providers directly, like Microsoft directly in their research group at all, or do you work with Anthropic in their research group directly, or OpenAI in their research group directly, or the researchers behind GitHub, and things like that? Do you work with these different researchers directly, or do you sort of keep yourself separate and just sort of do this isolated within your lab independently? Do you have any kind of collaborative work with the different providers out there?
That's a good question. Right now, somehow independent from such, cloud providers, but we are having a lot of joint research with particularly some software development organizations, companies, and also industry. And those are kind of the kind of direct user of such cloud providers. So we can say that we are doing something kind of indirectly, okay, with cloud providers. And for example, we are having a lot of joint research, for example, Hitachi, and so on, and so on. And so they're kind of a kind of strong partner of those, cloud providers such as Microsoft and so on and so on, Google and so on. And so we are working on some, joint research.
That's interesting. So in Japan, you have these joint research with big corporations, and these
Mhm.
big corporations in turn could be using different cloud providers. They would also have their own capabilities and things like that. Um, so I guess that would be true the same with the NVIDIA. Do you work we work with companies that use NVIDIA open source or NVIDIA tools, but and things that are provided by NVIDIA, but not directly with the company, but other companies who maybe using NVIDIA tools and sources and things like that.
You're right. And basically, we are working with the company which use NVIDIA and those hardware and platforms. And because our, the primary interest about it, how we can make, better software application in reliable and also in also efficient way. And so our concern can really fit within the interest of those, users, company, right? So country, we are working with those companies which use NVIDIA or those hardware platforms.
Because you have your own research lab and you're a researcher as well, and you're doing industry research, do you sometimes meet with Peter Lee? He's now the president of Microsoft Science. He used to be the president of Microsoft R&D, but now he's the president of Microsoft Science, which is a broader
Hmm.
mandate at Microsoft. Or do you work with some of the top researchers at some time, or meet with them at NVIDIA? So that's kind of one question. And are you attending the awards ceremony for IEEE at the end of April? And because Jensen Wong will be there, right? Because you got the Medal of
Yeah,
Honor.
well, oh, Stephanie, will you join that? And actually, I will miss that. So, yeah, I think it is Las Vegas, right?
No, it's New York.
Oh no, right, New York, right. Oh, you may join that, and I miss that opportunity, and yeah, well, uh,
Because Jensen Wong is there. The advantage of Jensen Wong being there is also he actually gives grants to universities sometimes. So
yeah.
he may go, "Here, I love your work. I'm going to provide a grant to your research lab."
Yeah, I know. And actually Jensen was is really a very kind of generous person, right? As you said.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and
for sure.
well, I didn't talk with him just personally, but he also came to the, for example, IEEE sponsored conference, like if I remember correctly, for example, quantum thing, okay, quantum in computing conference. That is the largest one is called quantum computer, but also supercomputer as well. And so he often joined such IEEE sponsored huge conferences and he generously yes has interacted with researchers and not just in academia industry and how also the and how IEEE like society can play some role to connect those different stakeholders, people, and let's envision the future together. So I like his kind of very generous support and also presence and support for the society and also for the community. So and for myself, I also had a chance to meet with not a CEO or but some kind of is very kind of top researchers from NVIDIA, but also Google, but also yeah Microsoft and so on and so on. And so I think that makes me quite provide me for thinking about what the future direction. Oh, and at the same time, unfortunately, I have a chance to work also in the industry at the same time. Okay, so I'm a professor, but also I'm somehow working in a company, a couple of companies as director, but also the kind of advisor. Because software engineering is about very must be very practical, engineering, right? So I always need to know what's actually the problem right now, and then what could be next. And so I need to always be familiar with such actual real problems. So that's why I'm also in the industry.
You see Jan LeCun, he's working on world models, and so Fifi Lee, they've started their own startups, and they got world models, and they're billion-dollar companies.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
So what do you
yes,
think about
yes.
that? Are you looking at their kind of work, so beyond LLMs, but and generative models into these world models, which are, were the kind of the philosophies different?
I think that's an interesting question. I'm in the kind of a software engineering, okay? So, mostly with respect to research. And then, for example, okay, so for example, talking about requirements engineering, okay? And I believe that in data, the agentic or agent-driven software engineering or intent centered or the software development, then requirements engineering is becoming more and more important. Okay, so there is a kind of shift, dramatic shift from how to make software or how to code to what to make and also why to make. Okay, so requirements engineering is exactly about the capture and nurture that what to make and also why to make. Okay, and to accelerate such requirements engineering, The general foundation model is not enough. So we need more specific foundation model. And also some researchers are talking about word model as well. Because when we try to capture requirements, we need to understand of course, the word or domain or what's the mechanism or what's the philosophy behind the system or under consideration, right? Or what's the business and how people are working behind such domain. Okay, so therefore, I'm really interested about such kind of word model. But at the same time, I think for from the viewpoint of software engineering, perhaps we need more even small language model. Okay, for each different task, for each different domain, and dedicated to very kind of specific kind of very small word or small domain or small task or uh, and then we can try to utilize much different small language models, not just one huge word or one huge foundation model, but a kind of collection of different uh, different small language models. That could be also potentially future direction, particularly for software engineering.
I see. So you prefer to have more specialized, smaller models and optimize for particular tasks and things like
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think but I think of course there could be quite multiple different directions, right? One is of course one fit all model. Hey, here's a huge model.
that.
That's it. So I think that and maybe particularly maybe but at the same time, yeah, kind of collection of small but very specialized models could be another potential direction. And maybe particularly I'm in Japan, okay? So what's the potential future direction of Japan? Compared with U.S., Europe, and some other, of course, major countries, and then okay. So hey, for example, U.S. is leading such a making
The big one.
huge, exactly mega ultra super large amount. That is of course a kind of very promising direction. But okay, then what we in Japan can do. And I think maybe not such making huge, a model, and but kind of collection of such small but very specialized and much reliable and also responsible models could be and also sustainable as well. That could be potentially kind of in direction.
So, Hiro, we're getting to the last few questions because I got a series of back-to-back interviews, and the question here is: you're part of IEEE. So, did you join IEEE when you were a student and you continued on? And can you talk about your trajectory in a couple of minutes of how you entered IEEE and the different roles you've had at IEEE and where you plan to go in IEEE?
Wow, that's $1 million question. Okay. So, yeah, okay. So my professional career with respect to the IEEE, I think when I maybe started when I think I was a student. Okay, so actually in Japan and also in also some other countries, IEEE is not the number one society. Okay. For example, in Japan, in computing and also information technology, okay, then the number one society is not IEEE or IEEE Computer Society, but much more domestic society. Okay. That is
IPSJ then?
wow, wonderful. Here, come to okay. So you know that. Yes, exactly. So IPSJ is a domestic and primary, society. So when I was a student, of course, perhaps without that, okay. So I simply joined the, IPSJ, and I started my career like, for example, student volunteer, right? As at some, IPSJ sponsored, conference and some meetings and also, had a chance to meet with, professionals in Japan and so kind of very professional community, okay, sponsored by IPSJ. And then after that, then eventually, and also some international conference. Okay. Uh, of course, it have been sponsored by not IPSJ, not only IPSJ, but also IEEE or ACM. And so then gradually, okay. So IPSJ, of course, really great, society. But also when, but considering such, much, global, activities and programs and, okay. So here are some, international societies like IEEE, ACM. And fortunately, while leading some, Japanese software engineering community, but also then I had a chance to join the steering committee of IEEE Computer Society Japan chapter. So that's a kind of, domestic kind of, the chapter of Computer Society in Japan. Okay. So then I took the role of secretary, vice chair, and also finally chair of Japan chapter of Computer Society. So then I could oversee the kind of our and also some related activities sponsored by the Computer Society Japan chapter. Okay, and while doing so, then I was getting more and more having chance to have much global activity directly sponsored by IEEE Computer Society, okay, such as IEEE Computer Society sponsored international conference, but also, yes, as I said, CBOK guide, software engineering body of knowledge. Okay, so at the beginning, I was just leader of, and also user of CBOK guide, but then, okay, hey, but maybe I may have a chance to some just even minor editing or review, and then I had a chance to lead the evolution of evolve the software CBOK guide. I think it was 2020, yeah, 2021. So 5 years ago. Okay. So then after that, actually, well, in evolution, there's no end about evolution. So actually, I'm still, leading the evolution of CBOK guide, but meanwhile, I had a chance to join the program board of education. Okay, because engineering education always needs body of knowledge. Okay, as a kind of solid background. So fortunately, the CBOK guide is often adopted as a foundation for software engineering education and training, and so I had a chance to lead professional educational activities both in computer society. And then, okay, then I thought that, hey, okay, maybe I can, utilize, these experiences and also some more and wider. And so I was really extremely lucky to finally be elected as vice president and then finally president. So and then I could oversee the entire the programs and activities of computer society. So that's a kind of gradual, steps.
Yeah, the IEEE Computer Society is actually the largest also within the IEEE, I believe, correct? Or
Stephen, yes, correct. There are a lot of societies and councils, but fortunately, Computer Society is the largest technical society under IEEE, and we are growing again. Okay, so we are having more and more members, and not just student members, but also professional members and a lot of members, and also and from academia, but also industry, and also regions and but I would say that there will be more opportunity to involve more and more industry. So that's well, and when I was president last year, yes, I really focused on how we can involve more and more industry. And then as a past president, our country stopped supporting the current president in Grace Reese. And then, we continue, working on how we can involve more and more industry, particularly AI, right? Because almost in any, AI, innovation is coming from basically industry, right?
yeah, for sure.
Right. Well, but of course in academia as well, but mostly from industry. So we wanna involve more and more in industry, particularly AI, and so that's why currently I'm reading the kind of very ad hoc committee about how we can have a better comprehensive view on the activities programs related to AI within IEEE society. Okay, then how we can have much wider influence and also connection to outside of our society with respect to AI, such as AI-related publications, AI-related conferences, yeah, and also AI-related communities and chapters and education and so on and so on. And fortunately, computer society is managing so many different activity programs from conferences, journals, publications, and some local activities, but also education and available knowledge and standards. And so I believe that we can have much wider influence with respect to AI. Well, of course, together with other societies such as AI, ACM, and so on, but computer society can do more about playing the key role in AI, leading AI, and also what's next beyond current AI. That's a key question.
So, Hiro, this is the very last question of our interview, and what recommendations or questions would you like look to leave the audience?
Oh, so the kind of message or
Yeah, it could be. So, what kind of recommendation you want to leave the audience, or or it could be or and questions you want to leave the audience, and that would be your closing statement.
wow. um that's oh wow. Okay, so firstly, I think you know keeping or continuing something is well it's quite obvious, but it's super important, right? So yeah, for example, for me, that is about patterns and also building pattern community and also doing research and practice in patterns and that guides my professional career from even early career professional and students to right now. And sometimes I got a question from some kind of very talented researcher. Hey, Hiro, are you still working in the patterns and yeah, well, yeah, 20 years pass or 30 years pass, and but I'm still working in the area of patterns and and so like that. If so my message is that if you believe something is really worth in doing, and then you go on with no matter how, how some others talk to you, hey, are you still doing this or that, or but you go on because so in my case that is pattern community and also doing practice research in patterns because that guides my professional career. And for example, right now, I'm reading fortunately, I have a chance to read, for example, AI agentic patterns and also IoT patterns, machine learning patterns. And so my closing statement. Okay. So first, my message is that, if you believe something really important for you and for your future career and or for some even for some technical aspects, then you go on. So then that is, for example, in my case, that is a pattern community, and so you stick to something and you try to continue that it looks worth doing. Okay, that is the kind of message. And then maybe the question could be, so, often, people, you know, try to work hard, okay, and do something better, and but often, lose the point, so why you do this, why you do that, and so what is the goal and what is the mission, behind that? And yeah, for example, about talking about software engineering, okay? Because making software should not be the primary goal or objective, right? So making software means needs to contribute to some much higher goal and higher value. Okay, so what kind of value, what kind of a goal could be accomplished by that goal and by the software, and how that affects the kind of mindset and the behavior and the business and also society. So my question is why you do that. And you need to always, we need to add that, well, question myself, of course, why I do this, that, and so that's why I often also like the concept of goal orientation. Okay. So what is the goal? Okay. And then we do this and that. And so without such, clarification of goals and values, and then often we lose the point. So that's my message, but also question.
Well, thank you so much, Hironi, Hiro, for coming in and sharing so much of your expertise and your wisdom with the audience. Hiro, you are a leader, a global leader in so many different dimensions, from research to industry and to society impact. So thank you again for coming in and sharing everything with
Thank you,
our audience.
Stefan. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.